everybody. It's so wonderful to see so many smiling faces here this morning. And I truly believe that this is just the start of a greater movement in your industry. Today's day one. So I have to warn you, do we have any dog fans in the room? Anybody love dogs? How about cat people? We have any cat folks? Okay. So I have to warn you, I have a lot of slides with dogs on them, but I do have one slide with a cat, right? Got to represent my cat people.
That's unacceptable, man.
So I know you guys are in the event organizing space, so I'm sure you've been on cruise ships. Every year, my family, we do a Disney cruise. If you've ever been on a cruise, you know, they're wonderful, right? But sometimes you eat too much, you know, they have those buffets. And you know, if you find yourself dancing on the deck, maybe you drank too much, right? And if they have a casino, maybe you spend a little bit too much. Or if they've got great gift shop, your wallet's a little lighter. Well, if you're ever dancing on the deck and you hear a great splash, and you run over to the railing and you look down, and there's the captain and the first mate rowing with all of their might away from the ship. That's what we call a tip, okay? I'm going to be giving you guys a lot of tips today on happiness, resilience, and success. So I wanted to start out with my favorite verse. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, what does that leave out? What does all things leave out? Nothing. You can do all things. Through who? How do you get there? Through Christ, who will strengthen you. And I just love that. That's what I call one of my shoe verses. When I put my shoes on in the morning, I walk on that verse. Now, Helen Keller said, we're going to start out with happiness, right? Because in order to be successful, science shows that you have to be happy first. That's a trait that most people who are successful have. So she said that true happiness is not attained through self-gratification, but through fidelity to a worthy purpose. At least we think she said that, because Abraham Lincoln said, the problem with quotes on the internet is that it's very hard to verify their authenticity. But it sounds very Helen Kellerish, doesn't it? Now, I'm going to talk a lot about purpose. And sometimes people say, well, I don't know what my purpose is. Well, T.D. Jakes said that if you can't find your purpose, find your passion. For your passion will lead you into your purpose. About 15 years ago, I was in San Francisco. I'm from the Bay Area, and everything's going right in my life. I was making a lot of money. I'm a financial planner, lived in a beautiful place, but I wasn't happy. And I said, you know what? It's time to examine my life. You see, the unexamined life is not a life worth living. So I came up with my happiness formula. It's purpose plus progress equals happiness. And I took out a yellow pad, and I beseech you to do this evening. Write this down. Go through this exercise. On the left side, I wrote down all the multiple purposes of my life. On the right side, I wrote down action steps. You have to do things. Happiness is not going to tackle you from behind and say, oh, it's you. You have to fulfill your purposes. So the first thing that I wrote down is be a great husband to my wife, Shannon. My wife is a CMO of a publicly traded tech company. She's a wonderful lady. And so for the progress steps, I wrote down every Saturday night is date night. Now, without her having to do anything, I had a whole stable of babysitters that would show up like magic at 5:30 every Saturday night. Now, I got this from my dad. Both of my parents are Irish immigrants. Both of them only had a 6th grade education. But my father said, you know what? I'm not going to let this injustice stand. Every week I will read a new book. And not just trivial books. I'm going to read books on history, books on philosophy, and books on psychology. And I'm going to teach my children everything I glean from those books. So on Sunday nights, instead of us watching The Magical World of Disney, we got a book report from my dad. We didn't want it, but it worked out well. And the morning of my wedding, my father sat me down. And I got my faith from my father, by the way. Went to church every day. And he said, Mike, I've been waiting to have this conversation with you. In all love relationships, at the beginning, you start out butting heads because you're both selfish. You both want what you want. But if it's going to be a real love relationship, over time you become as one. Now, what does that mean? That means that you would never be mean to the person you're in love with. And you're always looking out for their best interest because it's only in your best interest. So when that babysitter showed up, I would turn to my wife and I would say, where do you want to go tonight? What restaurant would you like to eat at? What movie would you like to see? Well, my wife and I just celebrated our 20th anniversary on September 20th. We have 2 beautiful children, and we are happier than we ever have been. It was wonderful advice. Now, I didn't grow up with a lot of money, but I grew up with a lot of love. Remember when generic foods came out? You know, as a kid, I wanted Coca-Cola, right? But my mom would say, oh, we're going to drink Shasta. It's 10 cans for $1. It's the same thing, right? I'm like, oh, it's not the same thing. You know, if you remember, Shasta had the flavors. They'd have cherry, orange, grape, lemon pepper, blue cheese, everything that every child ever wanted, right? And, you know, I wanted a Butterfinger bar. She got us Hammer Toes, you know, whatever off-brand she could find to save a little money. That's how I grew up, but I loved her. The next thing I wrote down was, be a great father to my 2 kids. And under progress steps, I wrote down, coach them in every sport they ever play. Even sports I didn't know. I grew up in New York City. I never played soccer, but that's what all the kids play. And so I got really worried. I don't know this sport. Offense, defense, yellow cards. But if you've ever been to a 5-year-old soccer game, it's just a group of children running around kicking each other, sometimes the ball, right? There's no offense and defense. But afterwards, taking the kids out for ice cream and pizza, to see their little cheeks filled with happiness and joy, because maybe they scored a goal. That's what it's all about. And as you go down your list, of course, write down, have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Action steps, go to church. Become a part of your faith community. Do things like you're doing right now. But do that, and I can tell you happiness is going to show up. I see beautiful friendships that are going to blossom as a result of you coming to this meeting this morning. So, Brene Brown is a professor out of the University of Houston. She's got a wonderful Netflix special. She's got one of the most watched TED Talks. And she has been studying courage and vulnerability for the last 25 years. And she says in life, don't live in the cheap seats. Live in the arena. I got the opportunity to spend a couple of hours with Muhammad Ali because I inducted him into the Happiness Hall of Fame. And I heard stories that I had never heard in the mainstream media. Did you know that, you know, everything we know about Muhammad Ali is very, very different. He was a very gentle, loving man. Did you know that he hated boxing? He didn't want to hurt anybody. And his wife, Lonnie, told me this story. He was a very generous man. He loved people. She said, when we lived in Beverly Hills, they sold star maps. And so, you know, you'd get this star map from somebody on the corner, and I would always run to the door if somebody rang the doorbell. Because if Muhammad answered the doorbell, he would invite them in. He'd say, oh, have you had lunch? We're having lunch. You want to have dinner? Have dinner. And then somebody, you know, Muhammad would say, well, where are you from? Where do you live? And they'd say, well, I just got off a bus from Kansas City. I have nowhere to live. He says, yes, you do. You're living with us. And Lonnie's jaw would drop. What lady in here wants to have strangers living with them, right? And they'd stay for the night. They'd stay for the weekend. They'd stay for a week, 2 weeks. And finally, Lonnie told me, I would look forward to when Muhammad left the house. Because as soon as he left, I would run to the window shades And I'd look out down the street, and he'd be in his Cadillac, and he'd go down and he'd make a left. And then as soon as he was gone, I'd turn around and say, okay, you're out of here. And they'd say, but Muhammad said I live here now. Muhammad isn't here right now, okay? And Muhammad would come back, oh, where's Jerry? And I say, oh, you know Jerry, classic Jerry, got to keep on rolling. But he was a very generous man. And one of my favorite verses on fear is Isaiah 41:10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Surely I will help you. Surely I will uphold you in my righteous right hand. What a promise from God. So the next time you're in fear, think about that wonderful verse, and God has your back. I was talking to Andrew earlier, and we were talking about renewing your mind. And Paul said you need to renew your mind. So one of my favorite stories about reinvention is the story of the Bubble Wrap Company. In 1957, two guys got together to get rich. And they took two shower curtains and forced it through a heating element. What came out the other side is what we know today as bubble wrap. They jumped up and down. They hugged each other. They said, we're rich. We've invented the greatest wallpaper the world has ever seen. And for 3 years, they went around the tri-state area trying to sell this garbage as wallpaper. Nobody bought it. In 1960, one of the inventors opened up the New York Times, and he saw that the IBM Corporation was in trouble because their 1401 computer, which was very delicate and had glass tubes inside, was getting shipped out. By the time it got there, it was broken. They'd have to ship it back. They were wrapping it in newspaper. So one of the inventors changed tact. He insisted on getting a meeting with the IBM Corporation, and it changed both the IBM's fortunes and theirs. Today, the Sealed Air Corporation, which it became, now has billions in dollars in revenue. What is it about yourself that you can reinvent? Maybe it's business, maybe it's yourself. I'm often asked to talk about resiliency. Resiliency is just perseverance through the hard times. And we're always going to have hard times. And that's where God shows up, right? Now, you can look when a challenge hits you, and I believe that all challenges are just blessings in disguise. You can say, this situation contaminated me. It has permanently damaged me. That's where most people go, and they stay in self-pity. But you can't be successful staying in self-pity. You can't be happy staying in self-pity. The people that rise above say, you know what? This situation happened for me. I am better and stronger as a result. Now, I've inducted a lot of people into the Happiness Hall of Fame. But we all know we have our favorites. Now, for years at Stanford University Faculty Club, we would have a big induction ceremony. 300 people. People would come from all over the world, and they would talk about how they make other people happy. Dolly Parton couldn't make it, but she sent me this video, and it's her take on happiness. In American Treasure. Now, why is Dolly Parton in the Happiness Hall of Fame? Well, she's written over 1,000 songs. She wrote Jolene, 9 to 5. She's an amazing singer-songwriter. But did you know that Dolly Parton has given away over 500 million books? Now, why did she do that? Well, her father, one of 12 children, a coal mining family, never got the opportunity to learn how to read. And she always made herself this one promise, that if she ever got enough money, she would make a difference so that nobody had to have the handicap that her father had. And that's one of the reasons why she's in the Happiness Hall of Fame, besides the fact that she's awesome. Can we all agree on that? Okay. Now that you're armed with some great advice on how to be happier, understand that everybody doesn't think like you do. Look at Guy Fieri's hair. It works for him, though, right? So it's hard to watch television with your children, with all the violence and all the language and all the stuff, but you can always watch diners, drive-ins, and dives, right? So we're watching that wonderful show with my wife, and I turned to her and I said, you know what? I've got a great idea. She said, what? I said, when we retire, we'll get a mobile home, and we'll go across this great land, and we'll go to the restaurants that he went to, all the mom and pops. It's going to be so much fun. And my wife turns to me and she says, good luck with your mobile home. Because here's what I thought. The two of us together, out on the open road, saying farewell to sunsets and hello to the promise of a bright near day. And here's what my wife thought. My wife watches a lot of Dateline. Okay. Mother Teresa had a profound effect on my life. Now, I couldn't induct her because she had passed away before I started the hall, but I did want to induct her legacy, the Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity. So I called up the local convent in San Francisco, and I said, you know, we're having this big event. It's our inaugural event. We're going to be filming and making a movie. And, you know, we would love to get your message out there that you're still doing amazing things all around the world. And the Mother Superior said, Mike, I can't do anything without permission from our headquarters in India. So I will check and I'll call you back. And I said, okay. About 3 weeks later, I get a phone call. And she says, Mr. Duffy, we can accept your award, but we can't go to your event because you're filming. We're not allowed to be filmed. You see, we had one star in our organization, and we don't want anybody to rise above the collective of what we do. You see, we have a motto, it's called All for the Poor. We don't have, we take a vow of poverty, all for the poor. We don't get to see our family but once a decade, all for the poor. I said, great, I'll be up there. And I turned to my daughter, who was 9 at the time. I said, Kendall, you have to meet these amazing women who dedicate their lives to the poor. I want you to be around that. And she says, okay, Daddy, can we bring up 24 of those fancy cupcakes, the Karas cupcakes? You know, the expensive ones. And I thought back to my generic background. I said, yes, of course, of course. So we go up there, and I hand the cupcakes to the Mother Superior, and she opens them up, and she says, oh, Mr. Duffy, these are so beautiful. And she closes them, and she goes, our friends on the street will love these. Now, have you ever had a word or a phrase that changed the trajectory of your life? It was at that moment that I stopped seeing people that were homeless as people down in their luck, and I started seeing them as friends. I started my Happiness Hall of Fame homeless outreach. I had been visiting with my friend Zach on the street for about 6 months. Zach was born without the ability to stand. In order to move, he has to drag himself by the knuckles. And after 6 months, I said, Zach, tell me, what are your dreams? What are the desires of your heart? And he said, Mike, my dream is to meet the players of the San Francisco Giants. I listen to their games on my radio whenever they play. I said, let me make a phone call. You see, the San Francisco Giants are in the hall. They had come out to Stanford with their 3 World Series trophies, and they talked about how they make people happy off the field. They also agreed to be in my movie, so they opened up their stadium for me. So I called up the front office, and I said, will you make this young man's dream come true? They said, Mike, absolutely. You can take him to batting practice, and he can even meet the players from our dreaded rivals, the LA Dodgers. As I was wheeling Zach onto the field. He turned to me and he said, Mike, this is the greatest day of my life. And I said, Zach, this is one of the greatest days of my life. You see, 1,000 years ago, St. Augustine said, it is in giving that we receive. And of course, everybody knows that. My dad wrote poetry for 50 years. And if I were to cull down all of his wonderful poetry, my favorite line of his is, love is the center point of living. That's my friend Tom and my son Mikey. He loves to come out on the weekends to meet his friends. So, you guys are in a challenging industry. By the way, there's the cat, right? I got you. And I put down 5 problem-solving questions you can use for anything. The first thing, and I'm going to highlight 2, the first thing, if I knew I couldn't fail, what would I try? Now, you have a lot of, big asks from your clients. I want this, I want that. And so ask yourself, well, if I knew I couldn't fail, what would I try? One of the greatest things you can do as an adult is to go back and take adult education courses. No, your education didn't stop when you got your diploma. And it's a lot of fun because you get to pick what you want. So there was a class at Stanford called Failure. It was done by a professor in his 80s who had started teaching at Stanford in 1959. And he was obsessed with success. And what he found through all of those years, the common element of success is failure. But in this society, we're afraid to fail. But if you're really afraid to fail, then you're afraid to succeed. And it was an 8-week course, it was 2 hours, and he broke us up into accountability groups, and groups of 4. And we would say to each other, what are you going to do this week that by next week we're going to meet, see if you did it, that you were afraid to fail? And I was shocked at how low the bar people set for themselves. So I'd say, okay, what do you want to do that you're afraid of? And they'd say, oh, I'm going to call my grandparents. Okay, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to organize my desk. Okay, I come back the next week. Did you call your grandparents? Oh, ran out of time. Did you organize your desk? Oh, ran out of time. So shoot high when you're writing out that purpose plus progress. And the other thing that changed my life is James 1:5. Ask the Lord, what should I do? James 1:5 says, if any of you requires wisdom, turn to the Lord and he'll give it to you in abundance. Now, I got that verse from Ron Blue, who started Kingdom Advisors, which I'm a member of. I'm a financial planner. There's 3,500 people in that group, and it started an event just like this. I'm on the prayer team. We meet monthly, and if you can't meet, we have a Zoom, and wonderful friendships has come about as a result of that. So whenever you're in doubt, say James 1:5. I wrote 5 books on James 1:5. I'd never written a book before. I'd open up my computer and I would say, Lord, you promise. And I would run out of time before I run out of things to write. And the other thing is to forgive. So I heard a great joke from an African priest. He said in the 1900s, there was no cure for rabies. If you got bit by an animal that had rabies, you had 7 days to live. That was it. So he told me this joke. He goes, in the 1900s, a man gets bit by a rabbit squirrel. He goes to the hospital, and the doctor says, I'm sorry, there's nothing that you can do except get your affairs in order. The man says, can you give me a piece of paper and a pen? And he starts furiously writing down names. And the doctor says, are you writing out your will? He says, no, I'm writing out a list of people to bite. Forgive people. It feels so good. That's my superpower. You know, when I was writing my first book, the happiness book, I opened up the San Francisco Chronicle, and there was an article on the happiness classes being taught by Dr. Fred Luskin and Carol Pertovsky. Both of them have become very good friends of mine. But I met with Dr. Luskin, and we had lunch, and I said, Fred, I've read all of the literature on forgiveness, But it's up here in my head, it's not in my heart. There are people that have hurt me that I simply can't forgive. What do I do? He said, close your eyes. Think about one of those people and say, I forgive you. He goes, you've forgiven them. He goes, you don't have to tell them that you've forgiven them. You see, forgiveness is a selfish act. You do it for yourself. You take the sword of forgiveness and break that chain to the anchor that's holding you back on who you're supposed to be. You become unburdened. You live a life lighter. So I would try that. The other thing is you have to forgive yourself. We don't forgive ourselves. A couple of weeks ago, I was down at West Palm Beach. I was inducting the great golfer Jack Nicklaus into the Hall. And I'm filming him. And the last question I asked him was, what is one of your most memorable times in your life? You know, he's won more majors than anybody. He's designed 240 golf courses. He owns his own jet. Image of success. He says, let me tell you my most embarrassing story. I said, okay. He goes, I'm playing a tournament at Pebble Beach. It's my birthday. I did really well. And we go back to the room and we're celebrating with all my friends. We are having a party. We're drinking, the radio's loud, everybody's happy. And somebody hands me the phone. They say, hey, it's for you, Jack. And he goes, it was a very bad connection. And so I said, hello? And it was my friend. And he goes, I got somebody here who wants to sing happy birthday to you. And he goes, the guy is singing the full version of happy birthday. I don't know who it is. I can hardly hear him, and I get cross. I said, excuse me, who am I speaking to? He goes, oh, I'm sorry, Jack, it's Bing Crosby. I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday. He goes, I wanted to crawl under the couch. Now, Jack is 83 years old, and when I say, what's one of your most memorable moments, he's giving me a story about he can't forgive himself. So forgive yourself. You are perfectly imperfectly made. Now, 7 steps to success. Number 1, read the Bible daily. Of course, it gives you nourishment. The other thing is, get an accountability partner. I've had an accountability partner now for 13 years. Before COVID, we would call each other at 8:45 every morning. It started off just talking about business, but then it got about everything. And now we talk every Tuesday morning at 8:45, and it has changed my life. And I would recommend getting an accountability partner in your profession. That way you don't have to explain what you do, and they know what you're going through. The other thing is, 200 years ago, Benjamin Franklin said that 1% of people are successful because only 1% of people write down their goals. And that's true today. Now, why is that? It's your subconscious mind going to work. When you write down your goals, even goals you don't think that you can ever make, and oftentimes you're like, oh, I just don't want to be disappointed. Write them down anyway. What happens is you are setting a GPS location for your subconscious mind to figure out how to get there. Have you ever driven a long way and you get out of the car and you're like, I don't remember driving here? That's your subconscious mind at work. And Dr. Wayne Dyer wrote 42 books. He has 10 PBS specials. I was supposed to induct him into the Hall in Phoenix. And then a week before I was supposed to meet him, he died suddenly of a heart attack. But what he used to also say is, when you will see it when you believe it. The cynical world says, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. But you have to see it first in your mind's eye, and you have to pray on it. You have to ask the Lord for help to get there, and that's the best way to do it. Now, how do you keep a positive attitude at work? Audio Bible, baby. Listen to it on the way to work. You guys are in a high-stress business, right? The other thing is, if you don't listen to that, listen to either certain forms of classical or 50s music. There's been a lot of studies on music, and that's the happiest music. 50s music is just silly music, but it gets your toes tapping. It puts you in that mood, keeps you up. And then the last thing, I'm going to tell you a story that has to do with finish what you start. So I was inducting Hale Irwin into the hall. And if you don't know who Hale Irwin is, he's rated as the 15th greatest golfer of all time in a sport that's 600 years old. And I said, Hale, I go all around the world and I talk to people about happiness, resilience, success. You have, you won the U.S. Open 3 times. You were the oldest man to win the U.S. Open at 45. You've never lost a Ryder Cup. When you retired, you went to the senior tour and you dominated for 10 years. What do I tell the people who want to be more successful? He said, Mike, let me tell you a story. He says, it's 1974. I'm at my first U.S. Open, and I'm on the 17th hole, and I look up at the leaderboard, and I see that I'm in first place. It was at that moment that I started to have a heart attack. He goes, I start to get dizzy. I start to black out. My heart is beating out of my chest. I said, I can't believe that there are millions of people around the world watching me. I'm going to be the first person to have a heart attack on television while golfing. So I look to the gallery on my right. Maybe I can just blend in with the crowd. There's too many people. I look to the left. There's even more people. And all of a sudden, a voice came into my head. And it was the voice of my father. And he said, Hale, I taught you to finish what you start. And I said, yes, Dad. I put my head down, and I made the putt, and then I went on to the 18th hole, and I did the same thing. And I won my first U.S. Open. This is what you tell the people who want to be more successful, but are facing a crisis. Have something, a few words or a phrase in your back pocket, so when that crisis hits, you are ready. For me, it was finish what you start. Just keep on going. For others, it might be something else. So have that prepared when that crisis hits. So I have a challenge for everybody here. This is my IMEX challenge. That is St. Brigid's Hospital's Children's Medical Center. I built that this year, and that's Christmas in August. I decided for the kids in the hospital, why don't we do something special? Why wait till Christmas to give them toys? So that was that day. They sent me the photo. And if 100 people visit my booth, I'm going to buy life-saving medicine. If 200 people visit my booth, I'm going to buy life-saving medicine and a cleft palate surgery. And if 300 people over the next 3 days visit my booth, I'm going to buy an incubator. They don't have an incubator currently, and there are infants dying as we speak as a result of it. And to let you in on a little thing, I'm already going to buy everything anyway, so but that's my challenge. And also I'm going to have a free headshot today and tomorrow from 11 to 3. So get a new headshot. So I'm going to wrap up now. I want you to imagine your perfect life. Who are you in relationships with? What are you doing? What passions are being fulfilled? Tell me, what are your dreams? You see, you are the author of the story of the rest of your life. Make that story one of amazing adventure, generous giving, noble purpose, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, incredible joy, and pure happiness. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.